and welcome to the SPJ Google Hangout for World Press Freedom Day. Today is Monday, May 4th, 2015. My name is Jennifer Karchmer. I'm an independent journalist and a member of the SPJ International Committee. Today I'm joined by several colleagues in the journalism field for a discussion on press freedom. This event will last for about 45 minutes to an hour, so we're glad that you're joining us live today, or possibly you'll be watching this later at another time via YouTube. So we'd like to thank Google, of course, for having the platform, thank SPJ, and I'd like to thank all our panelists who are here with us today. And of course, I'd like to thank our fellow journalists who have given their lives in the line of duty, because of course we will be commemorating them here today. So first, we will talk about what is World Press Freedom Day. It is a day, May 3rd, that was assigned by the UN beginning in 1993. Of course, it's no secret that journalists are facing mounting threats more and more, especially in the last 5-10 years, so we'll talk a little bit about that. I'd like to talk about the SPJ International Committee and what is that. What is impunity and why is that important for journalists and the public to know what it is? And I'd like to talk about some of the campaigns that are out there. In fact, we have two professionals who have one in particular we'd like to bring up, and hear from a few freelancers who work in the industry. We'd like to talk about global practices for freelancers, ways to keep them safe, and any other topics that are related to World Press Freedom Day. We have a hashtag that is SPJWPFD, which means SPJ World Press Freedom Day. So that's some information that's out there. Again, I would like to thank everybody for joining us. Really briefly, we have Benjamin Batka. He is in St. Louis, and he is a journalist. He's also studied journalism. I'll let him introduce himself a little bit further. We have L2C, who is in Southern California, who is also a freelance journalist and writer. She'll talk a little bit about her travels and her work in the industry. Cami Rice comes to us from the south of France in Marseille. Give us a little wave there, Cami. She's a freelance writer and journalist, and of course SPJ member of the International Committee. And we have joined by us as well Dana Priest, who is a veteran investigative reporter with the Washington Post, an author, writer, and current academic at the University of Maryland, who will talk to us about some of the work she's doing with her current students, one of whom is sitting right next to her, Layla Sarcevic, who is a current student and can talk from the perspective of someone new in the industry. So let's get started. Let's talk about World Press Freedom Day. I'm going to just toss it out there real briefly to hear from someone. Why is this day important not only to us journalists, but also to the public?
Well, I'll start. I think journalists are fairly aware of what's going on around the world, but for some odd personal reasons, we don't share that much with the public. Maybe we don't like to write about ourselves and our profession. But when you look at what's going on, it's really pretty remarkable, and unfortunately remarkable in a bad way. There are record number of journalists in prison, being killed around the world. It's in more countries than it ever was before. Even some countries that you might be surprised at who used to have a relatively free press have slid backwards. So this year in particular is an important year for emphasizing this value that is so important. And then hopefully for going into particulars, many of these countries happen to be U.S. allies. So what is, if anything, the U.S. government even trying to do about this, which isn't that much. So maybe we can also talk about the reasons why that is. So thank you for having me.
Yeah, thank you very much, Dana. How about Elle? Do you want to chime in there on World Press Freedom Day and maybe a little bit about your work as a freelance writer?
Sure. You know, sometimes it's always important to put away a specific day to bring awareness, especially in a time where we're in the grind and we don't think about what's going on in the world. And in the world of journalism globally, you know, when you're in the United States, you don't think about all the things that will happen in foreign countries. For example, we have lots of journalists in the Middle East that have been killed this last year, people that have been imprisoned. These are not common practices you see in places like the United States. and does not mean that we shouldn't have awareness and let people know that these acts are not right, and we need to stand up to it. And from my own experiences as a freelancer, I did last year was in Jordan. I wanted to do a lot of work with refugees in that area, so I did travel most of Jordan in the north. I went to Zaatari camp, I went to host communities. I wanted to see what was going on a humanistic level among these people that were affected by the conflict there. And as a freelancer, I did notice that there was lots of issues and obstacles that I had to overcome. And it made me realize that there are lots of things that I, as a community of journalists, for freelancers especially in countries and locations like this, that we need to support each other and have something where we can train, have proper training, have security for ourselves in these locations, all these different things that come into play. And for me, me personally, that experience, I've decided to start a nonprofit specifically telling stories of women globally in these locations and bringing in the world of journalists and filmmakers and telling these stories on a humanistic level, because we do forget that what's going on in these locations with these people is being lost in the grind in the media today, and that's very important to bring awareness to that as well.
Elle, why don't you briefly mention what the nonprofit is, where someone can find that online?
Sure. So right now we're in the process of launching. It's called In 1 Minute. So if I told you in 1 minute you could change someone's life, would you? And we're specifically starting in Jordan, and we're telling stories of refugee women in that area. And through technology, we're deciding to tell you the story in 1 minute. Who is the person? Where are they from? What is their unique story? And what they need to empower themselves or take care of themselves or their family, should they have a family. And immediately after you see the story, whether it's in the mobile app or on the website, we give you an option to donate to that person directly, either monetary donation or simply a donation of your time, mentorship, or skill, whatever it is that the person will need. We want to provide that.
Great, thanks for sharing that. Cami, why don't I turn it over to you, because you're an American journalist and writer, you're based in France, and you've done quite a bit of work throughout Africa and I know other parts of the world. Why don't you talk a little bit about being a freelance reporter and journalist and why World Press Freedom is important to you?
I think that one of the challenges, we are in a time where there's such a demand for content, but I think that the rates for content keep dropping because everyone wants content and no one wants to pay what it's really worth. And I feel like one of the challenges for press freedom is actually helping the public understand the value of the reporting that they're getting, because it's not weighty. When you see an article on a computer screen or on a piece of paper, it doesn't look like it took a lot of work to do it, actually. And for people who aren't writers, I think I often run into the assumption that people make that because I'm a writer, I write fast and it's no problem. And it actually often means it takes us longer and we're more careful about what we write. So I think there's a lot of misunderstanding among the general public what it takes to get the sources, to get the information, to do the time to do reporting well and thoroughly and give people the kind of information that they expect. So one of the challenges to press freedom in general, and also particularly in combat zones, is one of the challenges is just that it's hard for freelancers or any media folks to be paid what they need to in order to do the quality reporting that the public wants.
Yeah, exactly. Why don't we bring Benjamin in here a little bit? Why don't we get your perspective on the topics here? Tell us a little bit about what you do as a business person or media entrepreneur, and how that relates to journalism, and a little bit about your background.
Sure thing. So let me first thank you, Jennifer, for hosting this Google Hangout. And I would really think that this World Press Freedom Day is really important. I'm kind of seconding what Kami said a second ago, was that we really need to raise awareness for the public that us reporting and informing the populace is not something that they should take for granted or anybody should take for granted, and that many journalists pay a high price for informing people and telling them what they need to know. So I think one of the hopefully positive outcomes of events like World Press Freedom Day is to develop a high appreciation for journalism, because most people just consume news, and unless you've been an active member of the media, you don't really know how much work goes in there, and then also obviously the danger that a lot of journalists face worldwide. So that being said, I think it's an important day to remember what happened in the past, and more importantly, also think about ways how to improve journalism and safeguard journalists around the world. So my role, I'm a mediapreneur. I didn't come up with that word, but I like to see myself that way. And one of my beats is innovation, startups, and entrepreneurship. And I see myself as a storyteller who gives entrepreneurs a platform so that they can be more effective and reach more people, and also inspire others in the process to emulate change makers who come up with innovative solutions like Elle. So I think I really want to applaud you for your idea. I think it's great grassroots journalism, and it really gives people a face. It humanizes them a little bit, because so many times we just report numbers and we don't really get to know the people behind the conflict. So entrepreneurial journalism is one of my beats, but the other one is mass surveillance and adverse effects that mass surveillance can have on the news gathering process. So it's really twofold. So I'm trying to figure out right now where I will head in the next few years, but I like both areas a lot.
Nice. Thank you for sharing that. Just to toss some numbers out there, and then I want to turn it back to Dana and Layla and get your perspective and tell us a little bit about Press Uncuffed, because it sounds like a very important campaign. According to SPJ, which is the Committee to Protect Journalists, the numbers they show in the last 20 years is that 1,123 journalists have died in the line of duty, according to their methodology. Now, on the surface, that might seem like, what do we do with a number like that, 1,123? But over 20 years, that means almost 50 journalists per year are dying. Now, this isn't just, look, journalism is inherently dangerous. You're in a war zone. Of course you have to take on those dangers. We're talking about a change in the way that the press are viewed in conflict zones. They're being particularly and specifically targeted by groups that want to suppress and control the messages even further, and journalists are being kidnapped, detained, tortured, murdered in the line of duty. So to put that into perspective, about 50 journalists per year throughout the world are dying. With that, let's turn it to Dana and Layla to talk about your campaign and maybe some of the folks who you're highlighting through Press Uncuffed.
Sure. Well, our campaign actually specifically focuses on those who are imprisoned. Obviously, those who have died and lost their lives, that is a really tragic thing, but we feel that through this campaign we can really make a difference for those who are imprisoned around the world. So as of the last prison census that CPJ does, which is in December, I believe that they do them, they have found that 221 journalists around the world are imprisoned, and they're imprisoned through their methodology. They're imprisoned by their governments. So we're specifically focusing on those people that have been put in jail for reporting on corruption and other matters of state and politics in their countries. And they're typically thrown into jail on retaliatory charges or national security charges or things of that nature. So we have chosen 9 individuals who are from different locations around the world who have been imprisoned from anywhere from 16 years to just a few months. And we really wanted to highlight those different cases and the different countries, and through that, for me at least, what was really important is getting a different worldview of journalism and understanding that it is more than just what we do here in the US. And there are so many people out there on the ground doing really great work that we don't hear all the time, but they get thrown in prison for their incredible, courageous reporting.
Is there one or two that you could highlight and mention, and also tell us about the black ribbon that you're wearing, Layla?
Oh, the black ribbon I picked up yesterday at the museum in conjunction with our Press Uncuffed thing that they were hosting. They also had their own little event that was honoring and remembering fallen and deceased journalists. So that's what that was all about. And we were handing out our Press Uncuffed bracelets, which you can see here. And as for highlighting a couple of individuals, there is Khadija Ismailova, who is in prison in Azerbaijan. She is an investigative reporter who's done some really incredible reporting on corruption, specifically within the First Family in Azerbaijan. They have a lot of offshore holdings in tax havens, which link back to companies and various businesses in Azerbaijan, and they have made a fortune from that. And for her trouble, she was thrown in prison. First, her charges had something to do with inciting someone to suicide, which was absurd. And then when those charges didn't stick, they have stuck all kinds of tax evasion and other similar charges, which is pretty ironic, all things considered. So there's definitely Khadija. I don't know if you want to.
Well, there are a couple of
mention one.
photojournalists. There are two. One in Bahrain, Amar Abdul Rasul, and then another one in Egypt who's known as Shakwan. And they are photojournalists who were taking photos of protests in both those countries, mainly during the Arab Spring period of time. And they were in the middle of crowds, they followed protests everywhere they went, and in both these countries they barred the foreign media, or they tried to harass and kick out the foreign media that were there. So these local journalists became the only voice, the only visuals, the only way the world could figure out or see what was happening. And in retaliation for that, in both cases, they have charged them with things that not only their lawyers, but if you look at the case files, don't provide much evidence at all for the charges against them. And it's a way to silence them. So they are both members of our first round of these nine journalists that we're profiling. And we're really hoping then that we can create a social media outreach campaign vis-a-vis each of them. We're working with the Committee to Protect Journalists, and we're also working with the committees in their countries that have already been set up. So we're just an added voice to this. We're trying to enlarge the student participation among especially student journalists, and in particular for the reasons that some of you have mentioned, which is that student journalists, they grow up, especially right now, learning how to do all sorts of platform development, but not necessarily understanding what it really takes to be a journalist that acquires original information, that builds sources, that gets out there in the world. And all of these people were in prison for that reason. So each of our students is profiling one of these people, and through that got to know what people around the world are risking in terms of doing what probably American journalists just take for granted, basic reporting.
Thank you for sharing the details of the campaign. You know, you brought up mentioning SPJ. We've all mentioned that organization, Committee to Protect Journalists. It's based in New York City. So why don't I toss this question out to everyone? I'm a member of SPJ, as are several of us here today. It is a U.S.-based organization. I'm part of the International Committee, and I believe there had been an International Committee as part of SPJ years ago, but it kind of lay dormant, and it's being resurrected. Right now we have somewhere between like 30 or 40 journalists who are all part of an online group throughout the world, Cami I know being one, and maybe Elle and Benjamin as well. That's how we got connected. So I'll toss out there, does it merely replicate or is it redundant for SPJ to get into the mix in terms of defending and advocating for international journalists, similar to work that CPJ is already doing, and an organization like Reporters Without Borders, and there are several others? Or does it strengthen the messages that we need to have out there? Is it worth it for SPJ to put out a press release each time we learn of a journalist who's either been killed or detained or in some other way suppressing their work?
Well, I have a very strong opinion on this, which is the more the better. You know, you do need to be careful that you're not replicating what someone else has already done, but you're enlarging what they've done by joining in and being a louder voice. But you all these organizations have their different followings. Some of them are overlapping, but some of them aren't. And so where can you be the most helpful? And for SPJ, since you have such an outreach with various reporters in the United States, and CPJ does too to some extent, but they're really focused outwardly on the journalists in trouble overseas. So I say that the more voices, the better, and hopefully people can really importantly figure out new ways to reach out to the governments that are involved in this. So we're not just fundraising, we're not just raising awareness, we're also trying to figure out ways to make these governments change their mind about imprisoning these reporters and making it difficult to do their job.
I couldn't agree more. The more you bring awareness to a subject matter like this, the better. The louder the voice, the harder it is for them to shut it down and to silence it. So I truly believe that SPJ should definitely go into the route of providing these services, especially since we have American journalists going to foreign countries and trying to report, even as freelancers. They need to have that support and that knowledge, the background, to know that what they need to do when they're in locations like that. I mean, that's something that I, could have truly benefited from last year, and did benefit from doing all these things, from training and whatnot, because learning in school is so different from actual experience when you're in the location, and that kind of support is definitely needed.
Cammy or Benjamin, you want to chime in?
For sure. So I think I agree mostly with what everybody has been saying so far about SPJ's role, and I really see SPJ as an organization, especially the International Committee, to take more of a supporting role also, and more of a training role, as Elle just pointed out. So I personally have been involved in translating the Code of Ethics into German, and I know that several other individuals from the International Committee have also translated into their mother tongue. And so that's something I see where SPJ can add a lot of value to a lot of journalists around the world to share best practices and the standards that they can work by. And then also in terms of training, I feel like there's a bit of a lack of proper training, especially for crisis reporting, which I'm sure we'll touch on later on in this Google Hangout. But there's maybe not, I think journalists, they get their sources and their information, their training from lots of different places, and maybe it needs to be a little more uniform, a little more organized, and I think that's where SPJ can lead the way, maybe, to train journalists with best practices and seminars and help them internationally.
Just for me, I wanted to chime in and say, sorry, Cammy, was that, as somebody who's now on my way out of my graduate program, and who spent a bit of obviously time in college as an undergrad, students want to get active with something. I mean, I always find that there's always they always want to do something, and that for me, I think it was really important to think about how I could, as I'm leave something where journalism students can get involved and be advocates, because there aren't really that many things that we can be advocates for, and this is one of those things. And I think it's so important to activate young people, because they have the energy and the focus to really want to try and make a difference.
Yeah,
have it be also like a platform for mentorship. That'd be fantastic.
Yeah,
I'm sorry.
Exactly.
I was going to say, Layla, while you were speaking, could you just mention briefly what is your background? Are you earning a graduate degree, a master's degree, or a bachelor's, and what is it that you plan to do when you do graduate?
I graduated in December with a master's here at the University of Maryland in journalism, and my background before that was in film. So I've been working for something called the Organized Crime and Corruption Reporting Project, which does focus on some of the stuff that I talked about before with Khadija, as well as working on this and being really heavily involved with this. I'm moving on to an internship with the AP in June, and ultimately I really want to focus on investigative reporting.
All right, you've got a good mentor sitting right next to you.
Well, and we've been discussing just informally, but we could put this out here, is how do we get other journalism schools involved and other journalism professors with the idea that you just mentioned, you know, the idea of mentoring, the idea of that actually they can do the reporting involved in figuring out what the condition is of a journalist overseas. They can learn reporting through this this method by, you know, what we did is have each student take a journalist to profile and figure out how are you going to learn about someone who's in prison. And really, it's amazing what people came up with. It's just phenomenal. So how do you broaden that, and how do you get more students involved? How do you get more mentors involved? I don't know the answer, but I know that that's how we're thinking about the next step. So.
If I can add something to that real quick, thank you. So I applied and got accepted into the Fellowship of Global Journalism, which is a 2-year program based in Toronto, Canada. It starts with a 5-week boot camp, really teaching you the fundamentals of freelancing, how to pitch a story, how to develop contact with editors, and so forth. And I feel like really that's really what I need right now at this stage of my career. The mentorship really. Because more and more people are going to go into freelancing. There's going to be fewer and fewer paid positions. And I feel like while my graduate degree here in the US, especially compared to my very academic and theoretical undergrad in Germany, was very hands-on and very practical, and I was able to gain a lot of very important skills as a journalist. I feel like there's still a gap. What if I want to become a crisis reporter? Where do I go? And there's so many important skills, soft skills, hard skills, that you need to acquire to be safe, to deliver quality journalism pieces, that I feel like that it needs to be overall more structured. So maybe journalism needs to have more of an emphasis. Maybe one emphasis at a graduate program could be on crisis reporting, and others could be on different fields where people want to go into, to really develop subject matter experts who are really experts in their field and can deliver good quality journalism pieces under pressure and really be part of that. And I think that there's a pretty big gap, and knowledge gap, but also experience gap, and I think we need to address it. So that program in Toronto, I think, is a good start.
Can I jump in now?
Of course.
I agree with what you're all saying, of course, and I think one of the potential benefits of having this change the SPJ has made from the committee structure to a community structure is around some of these issues. I've been freelancing for about 13 years now, but I've kind of learned as I've gone. I studied journalism and have a bachelor's degree in journalism, but I've never worked on staff at a publication, and I would love to learn from. I have things to offer journalists younger than me, but there's a lot I'd like to learn from older journalists as well, more experienced journalists. And so I feel like the beauty of the community structure, one is for this mentoring, even if it's in an informal way, of beginning to develop relationships. Jennifer passed through town here a couple weeks ago, and we were able to meet in person and have a conversation. And to me, that I wouldn't have done that if we weren't on this in this community together. And in addition to that, I think that for the issue of journalists internationally, one of the things that SPJ can do that maybe some of the other organizations aren't doing is that we can create this community between journalists in the U.S. and journalists abroad in ways that aren't only under situations of duress, but are also just being colleagues and learning how we're all navigating the realities of our work in our different locations and learning from each other in that way. I think then for us to potentially rebroadcast some of the materials and information that these other organizations, Reporters Without Borders and CPJ, make available, we don't need to redo the research or the record keeping that they do, but we can also diffuse it again and catch another audience, kind of as some of the rest of you were saying. Like, it doesn't hurt to get it out again, and we'll catch people who aren't on their mailing lists. It does feel like we can't be an international journalism committee and not acknowledge these issues, that we have to acknowledge them in some way. But potentially our spin is to then focus especially on the community helping journalists find each other in order to be able to interact and mentor and share best practices and all that stuff in a really personal way.
Thank you. Yeah, let's turn to Cami and Dana real quick. I'm sorry, Layla and Dana real quick. As a recent graduate, Layla, what advice do you have for students going into journalism and choosing it as a profession?
I'd say that for me, it was that, okay, well, first of all, the reason why I chose it is because every day is something different, and that's really exciting to me. And even when I'm working on long investigative projects, it's still, and you have to be really passionate and all those kind of cliched things. But I think the other advice that I would have is to really, for me, it was to focus in on things that I really wanted to report on and care about. And I've done stories that they're stories, and I wrote them and they were good stories, but and of course it's work, and I really love doing it, and I love talking to all kinds of different people. But for me, what always excited me the most was stories that I could really tell, that I could really care about. And I think this was, being in Dana's class and doing the story for her was definitely one of those things, and that's the advice that I would give people is figure out, because journalism is such a wonderfully varied profession. You can do anything. You can be a food journalist, you can be a fashion journalist, you can do whatever you like, and that's great. But really, really focusing on that, and once you do that, I think things will really start to take off.
Nice. Maybe I'll pull Ellen here because she needs to head out to another press event. Advice for journalists who want to work internationally. You've done some work, you said, in Jordan. How does one do that if you're from the United States?
When I first started out, I was covering the film industry, Hollywood industry, and because I was here in California, and that's what people do out here. They love Hollywood, and they want to hear about everything celebrity. And at that time, when I first started, it was the first internship I got, and although it wasn't necessarily what I was looking to get into, it really does play into what I'm doing now, which is I got to meet with filmmakers and directors and people that truly know how to tell a story in a very visual way that is helping me now with what I'm working on now. And one thing I encourage people to let them know when they're first starting out, use any experience that you get, any internship that you get, it will be of value to you later, even if it's not necessarily in the field that you're thinking about. Let's say at that time I knew I wanted to go to the Middle East, but hey, I was stuck in Hollywood doing Hollywood LA stuff. But you have to definitely network and meet people and find mentors. For me, I realized that experience in this field is golden. And as much as I learned a lot in the classroom setting, I learned even more being in the field and putting myself out there and being genuine in what you want to do. And it definitely got me to the point where I was able to go in 2013 to Jordan for the first time. I was able to travel to Kosovo in 2013, and I promised myself I'd go back in 2014 and report on the things I had seen. So when there's a will, there's a way. So if you really want to do something and you want to do international reporting, there will be someone out there that will help you, and all you need is one person to support you and help you and mentor you, and it will go a long way.
Nice. Thank you.
Jennifer, I'm sorry, you probably will lose us in the next few minutes as my battery dwindles, but we'll hang on for as long as we can.
Oh, well, I will say thank you very much, and if we lose you, then we know what happened. You weren't upset with the interview, but and please continue to participate as much as you can. We really appreciate it. Benjamin, how about you? Any suggestions for the up-and-coming journalists or folks who are studying journalism today in school?
Yeah, absolutely. I would like to share something that Deborah Horan shared with us when I was still in university. There was about a year and a half ago. She came to Lindenwood, my alma mater, and she shared a few of her experiences covering the Middle East and other areas of the world. And so she gave us a few pointers, including finding the location of sources, calling local organizations, finding out which sources the competition is using and who are they quoting. She said also that university professors and journalists working for organizations can also give you valuable information. And above all, she said, you need to be proactive and talk to as many people as possible. So we heard that a little bit, finding a mentor and just really putting yourself out there. And And then remember, if you report from a different country, that to remember that where you come from. And by that I mean that you bring your own worldview to the table, and just be cognizant of that when you write and when you cover your beats. So that's something that I took away from her talk. And personally, I think what I learned in the last few months and years is that it's definitely a numbers game. So you need to be very, very, very proactive, and you need to send out as many applications as possible. And then I think, especially nowadays, you need to be a jack of all trades, but at the same time, you also need to master one skill. So it's both, because it's no longer viable to just focus on writing. You also need to think about how your organization, how they monetize your content, especially if you're a member of a new startup, not of a huge organization. So you really need to develop an entrepreneurial mindset, but at the same and be really broaden your skill set. But then at the same time, you really need to master your beat and be really, really good at one thing, because that allows you also to stand out. So I think both is important, and if you can really do both of that, then I think you have a good chance of being successful.
Nice, thank you. I want to just go back to the hostile environment training or conflict reporting training we've all brought up. I've seen plenty of publicity for a variety of organizations that offers this training. It's typically costly unless you're able to garner a scholarship or a fellowship that includes one. Has anyone on the panel either gone through or participated, or have some information on how to suggest a freelancer go through this type of training?
Well, I've seen advertisements now for free training put on by, I think it was ICIJ, the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists. So I do think people are recognizing that freelancers in particular can't afford to pay the fees to security firms that do this. And my best recommendation would be to look around these international organizations and try to keep on top of when they're offering them. I do see them offered for free more and more.
And how about you, Cami or Elle, again, just because you've both traveled internationally? I know, Cami, you've been throughout Africa. Is that something that was on your radar, or something you've pursued, or maybe something in the future? Do we still have Cami?
Yeah, sorry.
Oh,
good.
Okay.
Unmute myself. Yeah, I did not have that training. When I first went to Africa, my first trip there in 2007, I did a 4-month trip and had just a lot of contacts on the ground. So I was coordinating through them. So I was largely dependent on, and I was still a pretty new freelancer, so people weren't talking about this kind of training in journalism circles that I was in yet. And so I didn't have it, but I had local hosts in every place that I was, so I depended on them to direct kind of what was safe and what wasn't. For example, after the Africa trip, I was in Haiti for a month in 2008, and the friends that were hosting me there, I really wanted to get out and just walk on the streets. That's how I learn a place, is to walk down the street and walk around a town. And my friends were very uncomfortable with my doing that because people were being kidnapped in Haiti and Port-au-Prince at that time. So I had to, in that situation, and for the reporting that I was doing at the time, on that trip, which wasn't hugely significant, I didn't need to get into the darkest, hardest places of Port-au-Prince for what I was doing. I had to depend on and respect the information and knowledge of my local hosts, and trust them even if I thought they were overreacting or something. So that's much of what I've depended on is, any town you're in the U.S. or abroad, what's the word on the streets? Which neighborhoods are dangerous? Which ones aren't? Any city in the U.S. has those neighborhoods too. And so it's really helpful once you can get local knowledge of where you need to have extra caution and where you don't.
Thank you for sharing that, and I'm going to toss out there sort of a prompt for each person to think about in the fact that we're talking about world press freedom. I think we have sort of an interesting international group here, whether we're located elsewhere or we've got different backgrounds. I don't know if everyone has American passports, but it sounds like we've got interesting mix here. I like to say that as an American, I have quite a privilege of growing up in the United States and working as a journalist. I've worked relatively unscathed. I mean, I was mainly a business reporter, but I have not been threatened in any way. I've never woken up and been worried about turning on the ignition on my car and worrying about a car bomb. And these are dangers that journalists in other regimes do worry about on a regular basis. Cuba, Mexico, Pakistan, Syria. I mean, there are places we know that are very dangerous to work in. How about from each of us, if you can just say briefly, how do you perceive and believe you are free as a journalist? What have you enjoyed, and I assume have enjoyed as a journalist? How do you perceive your freedom?
Well, can I start since we may run out of batteries?
Oh, go ahead, please.
I did a lot of reporting for the last 15 years on the national security agencies, particularly the CIA and the NSA. And I know that right now there's a lot of fear of, surveillance and also people changing their habits because of it. And I've been in probably, pretty hot water with those agencies, but never, never enough to merit anything like what my colleagues overseas are going through. So I just think people, my suggestion is not become overly paranoid and really keep pushing the envelope in that way, and realize really that it takes a lot here to stop a journalist. And so don't get wrapped up in that too much, but really try to figure out how you especially can penetrate those organizations, the ones that are the most secretive and the most difficult to deal with, but hold the most power in the United States. For an American journalist, I think there's no better place to have a great time and serve the public and do interesting things.
Layla, anything to add in case your laptop battery dies there?
Well, in my nascent, it really is. I kind of in a similar way, I reported on the gubernatorial race here, and I remember kind of going crazy in the office because I just could not get through to one of the candidates. His people never answered my calls. I was going crazy, but then every time I would come back to Dana's class and I would hear the stories that everyone was sharing of what they were doing with their individual reporters and what they'd been going through, we'd kind of come back down to earth and be like, there's other ways I can get this info. Like it's just a guy who won't answer my calls. For whatever reason, he didn't want to answer my calls. But there are other ways for me to get that same information, and it's not that hard. Whereas there are other reporters out there around the world who find it so much more infinitely difficult. And I think that was a really important lesson for me.
Thank you. Elle, do you want to chime in? I know you might have to jet out to another press event.
Sure. Freedom, I think, is such an interesting element, because freedom here means something so different than freedom, let's say, for example, for me from the Middle East. And the value in the Middle East of freedom is something as simple as being able to express yourself. And I think at times when we're here in the States, we forget that we have such an incredible amount of freedom to express ourselves, have a platform. We can very easily, share our opinions, our ideas, and touching on this concept of what freedom means and what it means for me especially. It's something that has given me so much joy to be able to go to locations that I have been to and to be able to tell the stories of people that feel that they have no hope or freedom in where they are, and to show them that it doesn't have to be that way. And if I can be that person that can help even just one person to show them that they can have that prospect of freedom or opinion or the fact that their life matters, that for me has shown that the freedom that I have been given being here in the United States, I need to use that to the best way that I can.
And again, the nonprofit you're creating, it's called In 1 Minute?
Yes, it's called In 1 Minute. It's in the process of being zhuzhed up online. It's in1minute.org. We are in the process of launching our app soon, within the next month or so. And we are collaborating in Jordan as our first beta site. And I am also talking to people within Syria, finding freelance journalists within Syria to share stories. Also going into Kosovo and South Africa as well. So I think within the next 6 months or so, we'll be truly going global.
Oh, thank you for sharing that. How about Cammie and Benjamin, your thoughts on freedom?
I'll just say I think that one of my kind of memorable experiences in college, which was just barely pre-internet, when we had to track down our sources somehow. I don't remember how we did it. I made some calls, and it was some article for the school paper or for a class to a pretty high-level person at some company, and the person took my call and talked to me. And I was really amazed, and continue to be amazed, even cross-culturally, what people will tell you, the access they'll give you when you're a journalist. And it's a form of freedom that I don't have to be afraid most of the time to ask questions, and actually most people will take my calls, and just by the nature of being a journalist, I get access to them. Another thing that just happened on Saturday, I participated in I went to report on a World Press Freedom event here in Aix-en-Provence, which is just here next to Marseille, to see what the French journalists were doing for this day. And they were broadcasting 15 hours of conversations about press freedom. Well, when they found out I was a journalist, they invited me to be interviewed, and in French. And at one point, the question that the guy interviewer was asking me was sort of leading me to be critical of our president. And I, obviously, whatever my position on President Obama, good or bad, I wouldn't want to be on the record as having an opinion. But that isn't because I'm worried about President Obama coming after me. Mm-hmm. It's more concerns about professional ramifications of having an opinion one way or the other. And there's freedom in that I don't have to worry about our government being upset at me if I were to say something negative about them here in France. And that's a great thing.
Real privilege.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I would say, above all, for me, that freedom is something that nobody should take for granted, but it's easy. If you grow up in most Western countries, your surroundings are your measuring stick, and if you've never experienced anything else, then what you know is what you take for granted, what you know, and you take it as maybe the ultimate truth, because unless you start comparing it to other things, maybe to countries where press freedom is not as prevalent as in most Western countries. So over time, I had some diverse experiences that have been teaching me that I should not take this for granted. So maybe starting in school, learning about the not so long ago German history where the press was centralized and there was no way for people to voice their opinions, and that was not too long ago during World War II and during Nazi Germany. And then I also traveled the world in 2013 with a study abroad program called Semester at Sea, and I went to a lot of countries like Burma and Singapore where the press is not only censored, but it's extremely dangerous to report on very delicate subjects like corruption and other things. And so just getting that global perspective taught me not to have a sense of entitlement and really not take it for granted, because at the end of the day, democracy is not a history in its final state. It's merely a temporarily secured form of existence. So that really, I think that was huge, just the learning experience. And then at the same time, though, when we say that we are so privileged and other countries aren't, then we need to keep in mind, and this is also in accordance with World Press Freedom Days, it's not just the physical safety of journalists, but it's also digital safety. So ever since we found out after the known revelations that there's ubiquitous eavesdropping and mass surveillance happening that can really have an adverse effect on the news gathering process, with sources drying up and people not be willing to report issues to journalists, and journalists having trouble getting the information in an encrypted way and really not having the rights that they used to have, then I think we also need to look inward and look at our country and not ignore everything else, but also realize and admit that there's a lot of work to be done here domestically and I'm not saying only in the US, in the Western Hemisphere, but obviously also in Germany, as we've learned the last weeks and also months, is that the Germans have cooperated with the NSA, and so we really need to really also admit that here there's also a lot of work to be done here in our Western countries.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. Thank you for sharing that, Benjamin. I did a research project in 2012 based in Reykjavik, Iceland, where I talked to several journalists and folks who worked in media, both print and broadcast. Mm-hmm. And similar to the United States, we talked about having a peaceful existence as journalists in our profession, yet at the same time, either due to surveillance or this sort of subtle censorship that either came from the corporate end or, let's say, surveillance via the government, that, you know, that type of censorship is also very damaging, even if it's not one of violence that we know that occurs in other countries. Folks, we've got just a few minutes here. What I wanted to do was give each of you a chance to just say a few words to wrap things up. Feel free to promote a website, a campaign, your work in other ways, or to promote a hashtag or tell people something exciting that we need to know. And then we'll wrap things up here, and I'll thank everyone. Why don't we turn to Dana and Layla, who are still hanging on. Their battery is still
we're at 1%. So
all right, we'll take it.
I encourage everybody to go to pressuncuffed.org and learn more about each of the journalists. And from there, you can also link to the IRE store and purchase one of the bracelets to support CPJ and our campaign. And please use the hashtag pressuncuffed and spread the word and get the conversation going on social media. That's a really big thing for us right now.
Show us the bracelet again, please.
Sure. You know what? I'm just too hard to take. There we go.
Very nice.
It is clear for transparency, and it is shaped like a cuff so that we may all know what it's like, somewhat.
And Dana, from you, just a parting thought. Thank you again for your time.
Well, I think it's very exciting to think that groups that care about this would come together and figure out a way that they can be bolder in their unity and also work at their, you know, the thing that they're best at. Because I don't think there's enough pressure on these governments to act, because clearly they're not acting. In fact, they're doing the opposite. So one could argue that we're not doing our job, or that part of our job, that we need to be louder about it and perhaps more clever about the ways that we go about trying to change this really dismal situation.
Thank you. Cami, some parting thoughts from the south of France.
I think that I just think what we're doing, this conversation here today, being part of the international journalism community, being part of SPJ. I've just joined a French press association here. I find that the work I do is incredibly isolating as a freelancer. I work alone in my house a lot of the time, and so these kind of opportunities of speaking with other journalists, of sharing what we're learning along the way, are really energizing and encouraging to me. And so I think that that's part of, it's an important piece of doing what we do better. And so as SPJ continues to provide these opportunities and other journalism organizations do that, I think especially for freelancers who aren't working in an office where there's easy access to other journalists, these kinds of opportunities are an important part of doing our jobs better and supporting press freedom around the world. We'll do it better together.
All right, I hope to get to see you again in Marseille. Benjamin, how about you? Some parting thoughts. Thanks again for being with us.
Absolutely, my pleasure. So I would say that what's more important than having an opinion on many issues, not just in regards to journalism, but also about the recent events in Ferguson and other pressing issues worldwide, is what's more important than really having an opinion on them is to think about how you may exacerbate the problem, or then also how to contribute to the solution. Because there's a lot of opinions out there and a lot of people, so-called subject matter experts, but that's why I love journalism, because we are people who are instigating change, who are providing solutions, and who are going out there and really trying to make a difference in the world. So I encourage everybody who's out there who's been facing hardship or also physical danger just to keep doing the work, because it matters, and it will matter. It matters more now than ever before. So think about not just journalists worldwide, but also the populace, non-media related folks, just that how you can actually advocate for journalism and how you can maybe become a citizen journalist. And I think we need more of those reporters, especially as there are fewer and fewer full-time positions, and we should definitely train those people and so that they can be effective. And yeah, how you can contribute to the solution.
Thank you. Well said. Well, with that, it looks like we're going to wrap up right at the top of the hour here. So I want to thank all of have had to log out or in some cases lost the battery to their laptop. Benjamin Batka, thanks so much for joining us from St. Louis. Really appreciate it. Glad to have connected with you through the International Committee. Cami Rice, freelancer and writer based in Marseille, another fellow SPJ International Committee member whom I met just several weeks ago in Marseille, so it was nice to connect with you. L2C had to go to another press event. She's a freelance writer, came to us from Southern California. And also Dana Priest is a veteran journalist and investigative reporter with the Washington Post. She's an academic at the University of Maryland, and one of her students, Layla Sarcevic, who had joined us as well. We really appreciate your time. I want to also thank Robbie Ward, who is an SPJ member, who also left the call early, but he was the one who helped us all set this up, technologically speaking. We thank Google for holding this as a platform and SPJ for supporting us to come all together. And of course, World Press Freedom Day, which is May 3rd of every year. Today is May 4th, but really it's something that we can honor and commemorate any day of the year, and thank our fellow journalists and remember those who are still either imprisoned or detained, and certainly those who have fallen in the line of duty. And then for those of you who are watching this at a later date, we hope that you will either join SPJ or support it in some way. You can do so whether or not you're a journalist. And please do share this broadcast, especially if you're an academic. You could share it with fellow students and your classes to get a dialogue going about world press freedom. My name is Jennifer Karchmer. I'm an independent journalist and member of SPJ, and appreciate everyone's time. I will now sign off and hope to see you all again soon. Thanks a lot, everybody.
Goodbye.